Hello, this is Tony Blazier for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
This is Todd DeHoop, and welcome to the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and what this video is going to cover is the 2001 Kawasaki KX250. Now, the KX250 in 2001 was in the third year of its current body design. It had been all new in 1999, and this bike was very competitive for many years. This body design, basically starting in 1994, was a very, very competitive machine, pretty much through the 90s. It was really 1-2 with Honda for many years, and then kind of did battle with Yamaha towards the end of the decade. The KX was a little bit larger than the others. That perimeter frame was very stiff, but it made the bike feel very big. And that was one of those things that I don't think people really thought it outweighed all the positives. The KXs in the 90s had excellent motors, excellent suspension, but they weren't particularly nimble. I know my best friend bought a 2000 the year before this, KX250 brand new, and I remember thinking the thing just felt big and heavy. And at the time, I was riding a YZ400 4-stroke. So even compared to that, it seemed like a big, heavy machine. I never really felt comfortable in it personally. I know a lot of people like the 99 and 2000. I think this 01 wasn't rated quite as well. By then, again, the bike was getting to... I think that size was starting to work against it. This was the last year that Ricky Carmichael was on Kawasaki's, and famously at the time he had thought that the KX was really kind of falling behind the others in terms of performance. Now, again, some of that may have been Honda writing a big check from the Switch, but there was a little bit of a stigma at the time that Kawasaki really just needed to renovate this bike and kind of downsize it a little bit. They would finally do that 2 years later in 2003 when they would come out with an all-new KX250 and kind of address some of those issues, kind of shrink the chassis a little bit, make it a little more nimble. But this bike felt very big. It felt very big and heavy, and it just kind of had a strange feel. I think maybe if that's all you rode, it was probably not a problem. I think people, with anything, you get used to a certain bike and you're fine with it. And I'm sure a lot of people out there, I'm sure a lot of you out there will have had this bike and loved it. Me, like I said, the 2000 version, I was never really comfortable with it, but I was always jumping back and forth between bikes. I've had a ton of bikes over the years, and my buddies all had different machines, and we'd always swap back and forth. And whenever I got on the KX, again, it was just felt a little funny to me. But in any case, I think, again, this bike did have its devotees, and it wasn't a completely bad machine by any means. It was just kind of falling behind the rivals, I think, at the time. Now, this video is going to cover, as I said, the 2001 model. If you'd like to look at some of the other Kawasaki's, I actually just did a review of the 2003, the bike that would actually come out a little bit after this. You can find that on the channel. I've also done histories of many other machines, like the history of the CR250, the history of the CR80, all kinds of stuff on the channel. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the others on the channel. If you'd like to support the Motocross Vault, I have Motocross Vault merch available. I just came out with an all-new design. I decided I'd maybe try and do a couple of works bikes. I did one based on the 1992 perimeter aluminum frame YZ250, a machine that actually was never raced here in the U.S. They raced it in the All Japan Nationals where anything goes. They could race any kind of prototype you want. And this bike was super trick at the time. Interestingly, Yamaha never came out with a perimeter frame kind of like this. They've always kind of gone their own way with the aluminum frames. Even when they did go aluminum, they were a unique design. So they have never done the quote-unquote Honda style frame. And this 92 was really a awesomely cool bike. Super exotic. I don't even think they raced them in Europe. So I did this design based on that. I've also done one on maybe the coolest works bike of all time, the 1986 RC500 ridden by David Thorpe. This was the epitome of the works bike era. That huge radiator on one side, tiny little radiator on the other. Really cool machine. Basically, when everything goes. At this point, Honda had retired the RC here in the U.S. because of the production rule, and this European one was really the last year they did this, because in '87 Thorpe would end up riding like a production-based machine, which sucked. But in any case, this is one of the coolest of the works bike era, and I thought this would make a neat shirt, so I did that. So you can find a link to that in the description below, and I'll put a little card here as well. And one thing I do want to say before we get into the video is I apologize if there's a little bit of background noise in some of this. Unfortunately, the lovely horse farm, which is outside my house, is being flattened and turned into houses as we speak. Super bummer for me, because this place was always one of the best things about where I live. Was there's a really great, beautiful field, even though I live in the middle of town, right here in the center of town. And it got recently sold, and they're turning them into townhouses, so sad face. But you're also going to meet there right now. There's like tons of machines out there doing all kinds of lifting, moving, scooping, and what have you. So there may be a little bit of background noise. So I do apologize for that. This mic is pretty good as far as directional stuff, but if you hear a little bit of stuff in the background, that's what that is. So bear with me. I imagine that from time to time there may be a little bit of background noise here, but hopefully it won't be too distracting. So here's the story of the 2001 Kawasaki KX250. The 2001 KX250 was the third year for Kawasaki's latest 250 design. Originally debuted in 1999, the machine was basically a refined version of the 94 KX, wrapped in all-new bodywork. In 1999, it was good enough to take the title of Best 250 two-stroke, but the competition was quickly gaining steam. Riders still praised its torquey power plant, but bemoaned its girthy chassis, anemic brakes, and mushy suspension. As the new decade began, the KX was starting to feel like a machine rooted in the 90s, while all the competition roosted away into the new decade. In truth, it's not hard to see why Kawasaki had stayed with this formula for so long. Throughout the 90s, the KX's recipe of meaty low to mid power, mated to ultra plush suspension and a stable chassis, had served them well. They had reeled off several motocross and supercross titles and captured more than their fair share of shootout victories. It was a proven design which made green the color to have throughout much of the grunge decade. Unfortunately, however, success often breeds complacency, and Kawasaki got sucked into this trap as the decade came to an end. As the competition pushed the envelope in design and performance forward, Team Green stubbornly held onto their same basic machine year after year. By the time the 2001 KX250 made its debut, that tried-and-true 94 chassis was beginning to show its age. Originally debuted on the 1990 KX, Kawasaki's steel perimeter frame had been quite big news at the time. Perimeter frames had been used for many years on road race machines, but had never crossed over into the off-road world. The perimeter design offered excellent structural integrity and very little flex, but it also tended to be wider and larger overall than more traditional off-road designs. On the KX, the new chassis offered excellent stability and a solid feel, but it did lack finesse in the corners. It was a big bike, and it felt every bit of it. Over the next few years, Kawasaki would refine their KX250 into a serious motocross weapon. By the mid-90s, the KX250s were some of the best machines available in their class. They racked up victories in magazines and on the track. They offered a snappy and hard-hitting power band, a workmanlike chassis, and plush suspension. They were still big, tall, and heavy bikes, but most riders were willing to overlook those things in order to get to the awesome motor. As the 90s came to a close, Yamaha began to nip at Kawasaki's heels, however. After several years of playing second fiddle to Honda and Kawasaki, the boys in blue nailed the mark with the 2000 YZ250. It offered the wide, usable power band of the KX, bolted to a chassis that could turn rings around the big green machine. It was Kawasaki's first shootout loss since 1996, and a sign that the 250 landscape was changing. Honda was finally getting a handle on their alloy frame CRs, Suzuki was introducing a supercross scalpel with their RM250, and Yamaha had refined their proven YZ250 to a nearly perfect motocross weapon. If Kawasaki was going to take back the title of Best 250 in the land, they would need to pull out all the stops in 2001. Starting in 1997, Kawasaki had produced some of the best 250 motors in the track. They featured lightning-fast throttle response and a hard-hitting delivery. While the Hondas of the time came on soft and shrieked to an ear-splitting top-end blast, the Kawasaki's churned, grunted, and blasted their way around the track. It was perfect for the quick burst needed in motocross and gave the KX a lively feel that riders loved. For 2001, Kawasaki changed the flywheel, modified the porting, and changed the expansion chamber on their proven 249cc mill. The result was a more mellow powerhouse for 01. It still came on strong from the first crack of the throttle, but it hit with less authority and was slightly smoother overall. In the middle, it surged instead of barked before pulling into a decent top-end hook. It was still fast, but much smoother than previous KXs. This new easier-to-ride power spread lacked the top-end pull of the rocket-fast Honda, but it was still very effective on the track. For Kawasaki, the real problem was Yamaha, who was now beating the KX at their own game. Yamaha had taken the lessons learned from Kawasaki's excellent mid-90s motors and one-upped them with their new YZ250 mill. The YZ turned out an unbeatable spread of power in 2001, and it had all the bases covered. It came on even stronger than the Kawasaki down low, then proceeded to keep that power advantage all the way to the rev limiter. It was a true do-it-all power plant, which could be lugged or revved with equal effectiveness. The KX was still an excellent motocross engine, but it was no match for the omnipotent YZ in 2001. In 2000, the KX had been undone by its overly soft suspension. For 01, Team Green upped the spring rates both front and rear in an effort to bring the performance more in line with the competition. The new stiffer spring settings were a huge improvement and helped give the Kawasaki bladder-style forks a big bump up in performance. They offered very good feel and excellent bottoming resistance. Overall, they were rated to have the best combination of bump absorption and ride comfort in the class and took the title of Best Silverware of 2001. In the shock department, the new KX was head and shoulders better than the year before. The 2000 model had been overly soft and hung down in the stroke under acceleration. To combat this, Kawasaki ditched its dubious progressive rate shock spring and went with a straight rate spring in 2001. This allowed the bike to stay up in the travel and not slam into the stiffer portion of the damping curve on small impacts. By going with a stiffer spring, the shock action was actually plusher, while also providing better control on big hits. Overall, the Yamaha was picked as having the best rear suspension in 2001, but the KX was very close, and everyone liked its overall performance. Where things started to go south for the KX in 2001 was in the chassis department. In the motor and suspension categories, the Kawasaki was at or near the top of the heap, but when it came to handling and overall feel, the big machine was an SUV among sports cars. Never a lightweight, the KX weighed a good 15 pounds more than the next lightest bike in the class. At 235 pounds ready to ride, it was actually heavier than many modern 454 strokes and felt every bit of it. As if the weight alone wasn't bad enough, the stamped steel perimeter frame was also wider and taller than the competition, giving the bike a very large feel. This made the YZ and RM feel like 125s by comparison. In terms of handling, the 2001 Kawasaki basically handled like every KX since the introduction of their perimeter frame in 1990. It was solid at speed, but clumsy in the corners. Its big and tall chassis preferred to be steered around the outside as opposed to diving for the inside line. It was better on flat slippery turns than deep berms, and it did not like to be leaned hard into turns. One thing Kawasaki offered in 2001 to aid the handling of the Big Quacker was an optional 20-inch front wheel. The smaller wheels were all the rage for a short time in the early 2000s, and Kawasaki offered this option to improve the steering feel and response. This addition did help the old school KX feel a little more responsive, but it was still no RM in the corners. Detailing was one area that had haunted the KXs throughout the 90s, but the 01 KX did make inroads in this area. For most riders, the biggest complaint had centered on Kawasaki's anemic and mushy brakes. Year in and year out, the KX had the worst binders in motocross, and no amount of bleeding or fiddling could sort out their spongy action. For 01, Kawasaki did something about this deficiency with a list of changes designed to bring the KX up to speed with the competition. They upped the size of the front caliper's piston by 19%, beefed up the piston size in the master cylinder by 1.5 millimeters, and spec'd a set of grippier pads. The result was a much improved bite and a firmer feel at the lever. It was still not up to the power and feel of the class-leading Honda, but it was far better than previous efforts. Other nice details on the KX included adjustable rubber-mounted bar clamps, a super trick and durable graphite paint on the expansion chamber, which proved much more durable than traditional paints, and plastic frame guards. On the negative side were the KX's handlebars and its overall durability. The stock steel bars appeared to be made out of butter and would start to show cracks in the paint from flexing within a few rides. Overall, the KX seemed to wear out at about 4 times the rate of a Honda. By mid-season, the KX felt tired and beat, while the CR and YZ still seemed fresh and tight. The 2001 KX250 was a fantastic 1994 machine up against 2001 competition. It still had the motor, but it lacked the finesse to be a winner out of the crate. It was a big, tall, and overweight sumo in a class full of ninjas. In 2003, Kawasaki would introduce an all-new KX250. In 2003, Kawasaki would introduce an all-new KX250 that would address many of these issues, but it would never recapture the lost glory of the mid-90s Kawasaki machines. By 2007, the KX250 would be history, replaced by an all-new KX450 thumper and a new era of Kawasaki champions. So there you have it. That's a look back at the 2001 Kawasaki KX250, a machine that certainly had its supporters, a bike that definitely wasn't a complete disaster by any means. It was just maybe in need of a little bit of a diet. Much like myself, it was getting a little larger as it got older, and mine needed to see Jenny Craig a little bit. Big, heavy machine, but, depending on the kind of riding you were doing, and certainly at the novice level or anybody who wasn't a pro was fine. And even the pro level, it did. Obviously, Ricky Carmichael's bike did pretty well. Although I'm sure they've done a lot of stuff on his. His bike was certainly a trick. Certainly one of the best looking Kawasaki. I love the looks of these bikes. They're really good looking motorcycles. I remember my buddy Jamie, when he had his 2000, he actually went with the split fire look, which I thought was just an awesome look. With the, it's kind of funny now, the monster Kawasaki's all look the same every year. There really, it's hard to even tell one year from the next sometimes. But back in the 90s, the Pro Circuit team, they came out with some really cool looks, and the bikes varied greatly from year to year. And this body style Kawasaki, there were some good looking machines. Certainly Ricky's bike, the Pro Circuit bikes at the time, they were all pretty badass. So again, great motorcycle in some ways, maybe a little bit overweight. But hey, if it wasn't for people loving overweight things, I wouldn't have a wife for starters. So there you go. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the others that are done on the channel. If you could like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you'd like to see next. I'm working on many videos. Like I said, this is always a work in progress. I do a ton of research to even do these videos, so it takes me a while. But I definitely take your requests under advisement. I'm working on stuff all the time, so if you have a particular motorcycle you'd like to see me do, hit me up in the comments, and I'll definitely read it and take that under advisement. Until we meet again, this is Tony Blazier. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.